Hey everybody, welcome to the I Am Podcast YouTube channel.
Make sure to tap the bell, subscribe, and comment down below.
Hey everybody.
Welcome back.
It feels like it has been forever since we've sat in these chairs.
I came in the room and I was like, wow, I forgot what it looked like in here.
But we have been waiting for this guest for a long time, and we are very excited to have lawyer Alex here with us today. So, Alex, if you could introduce yourselves for us and the people who are listening.
Hey, hi everyone. I'm Alex McNabb, and I live in Calgary. I'm from Newfoundland, but I've been in Calgary for almost 20 years. And I'm a family and fertility lawyer. And in the last sort of 15 to 18 years, I've been practicing primarily in fertility law. That's what I do. I help intended parents and surrogates and donors, sperm donors, egg donors, and embryo donors through the legal processes.
Very cool.
When you're not working, what are you up to? What fills your cup outside of this?
So in the winter time that we're in right now, we are skiing all the time. So my daughter's involved in a racing program based out in Akiska. So we are out there every weekend, rain, shine, freezing, warm, spending time on the slopes. And in the summertime, we spend most of our time camping in the mountains as well. We spend a lot of time in the mountains.
So were you born and raised in Newfoundland?
I was, yeah.
Where's your accent?
So it depends on where you are from on the island as it relates to an accent. But yeah, I mean, if you had told me when I was a younger person that I'd be practicing in Western Canada, I would have told you that you're crazy. But I met my husband, he's from Chile, but he was in St. John's doing his Master's of Geology when I was articling as a lawyer. And so eventually I moved out here to be with him because he's a geologist, and he's not a geologist anymore. He's a teacher now, but I followed him out here.
You
what we
poor,
do for
poor
love.
man. Yeah.
Yeah.
Taking this a whole new direction, how did fertility law find you?
Yeah.
Like, is that what you wanted to do when you became a lawyer, or did it kind of just fall in your lap? Like, how did
It
that
sort of fell in
notion-
my lap in a way. I mean, when my husband and I were thinking about building our own family, we were considering all those options to have children, and really the only options out there at the time were adoption and surrogacy. Really, those are likely the only options even today. But you guys know Ellen Embry, who's
Yeah.
a really close friend of mine, and she practices in fertility as well here in Calgary. And I met Ellen. I didn't know her before this, but I met her through our own family building journey and had a conversation with her about what that would look like, having a family through surrogacy for me and Rodrigo. And our own friendship developed, and we started working together, and my own practice has developed from there.
Right, because you went into law school thinking, I'm going to do family law.
I went into law school thinking I was going to practice labor and employment in Newfoundland.
Right.
And so I left that concept and moved to Northern Labrador for 2 years and worked in legal aid, practicing in criminal and family law and representing a lot of First Nations people. And then ended up out in Alberta to be with Rodrigo, and I started practicing family law when I came out to Alberta. And then fertility is sort of like I consider it like a niche area or a subset area of family law. It's a type of family law.
Right.
It's a lot more positive than family law. You're sort of building families with people rather than trying to, as I call it, redefining families through family law. But I never would have told you that I would have been practicing fertility law when I graduated law school. I was going to be a labor lawyer.
Do you think you'll practice fertility law until you're done your career at this point?
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you could change something about how we do surrogacy and egg donation in Canada, what would it be?
So right now, you guys are well aware of this. So Canada is an altruistic jurisdiction, which I think is a good thing. I think it attracts a certain type of person to the process, and there's very little disputes as it relates to, if any disputes, as it relates to people entering into the legal side of this process. But because of the altruistic nature of the process in Canada, it's illegal, it's a regulatory offense to compensate your donor or your surrogate. And the state of the law is that if you compensate as an intended parent, if you compensate a donor or a surrogate in any way throughout this process, then you're subject to a $500,000 fine, 10 years in prison, or both. And I think that's ridiculous.
Is it like 10 years?
Because
10 years is a long time.
and I would like there to be a way to define this. So because it becomes ridiculous. Because if you want to, as an intended parent, provide your surrogate or your donor a gift, if you want to send them out to dinner, if you want to send them a bouquet of flowers, then theoretically you're compensating them and you're running afoul of the law. And I think that I don't think that's the spirit of the law, but that's the risk.
What's one thing that you wish, and it could be coming from any side of it, that you wish your clients knew, or you wish people knew in Canada, like when it comes to what we do?
I think that there can be a ignorant concept that women that are getting themselves involved in donation of their ovum or acting as a surrogate for a set of intended parents are somehow being taken advantage of, and they don't have a choice in this process. And I think that is so wrong. And I think it's a fulfilling process for all parties involved. And so that incorrect perception is something that I wish people understood differently.
Yeah.
There is definitely a stigma. I mean, we do still see it all the time. I
think people assume that because of the model of like the States, or I don't know what it is, but that either she's doing this for the money or she is doing this against her own will. Like
she doesn't have a choice, and so she needs to enter into this process to somehow help her or her family survive, and that's so incorrect.
Yeah. It's really sad that people can't just assume that, she's 25 or 35 or however old she is, she's not intelligent enough to know this is what I want to do with my own body to help somebody. Like, we just automatically assume that she's
and
not.
you find that I have found in my experience that the women that are putting themselves forward for this process, they tend to be in caregiving roles. They can be nurses, they can be teachers, they can be, they're educated. And so they're far from being taken advantage of.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that when I speak to surrogates, it's an empowering choice for them.
Oh, 100%. Totally. Very much so. Yeah. I think that it's a very empowering decision as opposed to something that what I think people don't understand is that she wouldn't do it if she didn't want to.
Yeah.
Like,
they can have their own children.
Yeah.
Right? And if they didn't want to do it, they wouldn't be part of the process.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. People forget that these women are volunteers.
That's right, yeah.
So what a day-to-day, walk us through the way you help families on a day-to-day, what does that actually look like? Is that mostly reviewing agreements? Is that mostly providing advice? Like, what do you do in a day for the most part?
So it depends on who I'm helping, right? Yeah. So if I'm helping a set of intended parents, what that process would look like from the beginning is they're either going to find me directly or they're going to be speaking with an agency or a clinic and they're going to be referred to me. And then we're going to have sort of, an overview conversation about what this process looks like, what they can expect in entering into this process in Canada. And I give them sort of like a step-by-step process because the process can be really overwhelming. So there's 3 legal processes, potential 3 legal processes that intended parents are going to be involved in, and that is, donation of genetic material to create embryos, then finding a surrogate, and then your legal process that you engage in for that, your contract with your surrogate. And then when their baby's born, their legal process to transfer parentage from their surrogate, the partner, if they have a partner, to the intended parent. So I try to break it down in that first conversation so they're not overwhelmed and so they know that when they leave that conversation that the first piece of the puzzle is to choose that clinic and create the embryos and get that piece of the puzzle dealt with, and that all of the pieces will come into play as the process moves along. And so once they've had that conversation and they've chosen their team, they've chosen their lawyer, they've chosen their agency, and they've chosen their clinic, then we usually will get to that legal process. And so once they've chosen their donor, my role with them will be, once they've chosen that donor and that donor has been medically cleared by the donor's clinic, we'll create a contract together, and that will be legal advice. Okay? And then once they have those embryos in place, they start their journey looking for their surrogate. And usually what will happen if you're representing the intended parents is once that match happens and everybody chooses the surrogate and the intended parents choose to move forward together, and there's clearance by the clinic, then there's going to be information exchange between both lawyers. So if I'm representing the surrogate at that stage, then I'll have a conversation with her and try to deal with some of the high-level issues that the contract is going to address and talk to her about what her needs and expectations are, what her expenses look like, what her beliefs are on termination of a pregnancy, issues of travel, whether she understands that it's important that she stays within her jurisdiction at a certain time of the pregnancy. And we will be involved with the lawyers, like both lawyers will be involved, whether I'm on for the surrogate or the intended parent, and we'll try to assess those issues at the outset, even before we do the contract. And then once all those pieces of the puzzle are agreed to, there will be a contract drafted between the intended parent counsel and surrogate counsel, and there'll be legal advice there as well. And then once the baby's born, then there's that parentage process.
Do you find, is the last step, like the declaration of parentage and doing all of that, is that really just a matter of paperwork, or is there really any legal advice, any moments that get tricky in that spot? Because I mean, we're really experienced when it comes to donor contracts, surrogate contracts, but that paperwork afterwards, is it really just about doing the paperwork, or is there quite a bit of legal advice that goes with it?
It should be more about paperwork because a lot of the groundwork has been put in place prior to when you get to that stage. We're lucky in Canada that the majority of jurisdictions, the majority of provinces have really smooth processes for that when you get there. And you have dealt with a lot of what you can expect to happen when you get there before you even get there. So it should be a smooth process. And there's an education component to both the surrogate and the intended parents about what they can expect, but the actual process should be quite smooth.
Okay. When it comes to going over this information, what part do you find the hottest topic especially between surrogates and intended parents? What do you find tends to be the most taboo or touchy thing?
Well, I mean, so of the three legal processes, the one that probably takes the most time and the most discussion back and forth between counsel and the parties is the surrogacy agreement. And so even before you get into the surrogacy agreement, whether I'm representing a surrogate or I'm representing intended parents, there are a couple of things that I always highlight to them and say, make sure you're on the same page with the other party before you even get into the legal process so it doesn't become a hot topic. And so those issues are always abortion, because in Canada, you cannot force somebody to terminate a pregnancy, and you can't stop somebody from terminating a pregnancy. So it's really important from my perspective that no matter who I'm representing, that those parties are on the same page. So if it's the intended parent's wish that if their child has a potential physiological or genetic abnormality by virtue of having testing done throughout the pregnancy, and they want to terminate the pregnancy, that the surrogate is okay with that request. And if she's not okay, that everybody is upfront with that at the beginning. Most surrogates, I find, are generally open to accepting what the intended parents want, assuming that there is is, a medical or genetic or physiological problem. They're not open to entering into a pregnancy and getting halfway through a pregnancy and an intended parent saying, I don't want the baby anymore, so please abort it. And for your own information, I've never heard that ever happening. But
Yeah.
you want to make sure that as best as possible, that if the surrogate has some beliefs and some requirements as it comes to that issue, that you deal with that up front. Some surrogates are not comfortable terminating a pregnancy if there's a risk of Down syndrome, for instance. So you want to be, as open with the parties and that's an uncomfortable conversation, right?
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that people are as aligned on that issue as best as possible. And then another issue, of course, is the issue of travel, because we want to ensure as best as possible that a surrogate is going to give birth in the jurisdiction where she lives, because you want to ensure that that there is a parentage process available to transfer the parentage of the child to the intended parents. And if they're outside of Canada, following 24 weeks gestation generally, because a baby's considered viable at 24 weeks, that could cause problems. That could cause immigration problems. That could cause healthcare problems. So you want to deal with that issue at the outset. I'd say those are the two biggest ones.
Right. And if you were giving, I guess what brings out your protective side in a lawyer when we're dealing with these matters, and what's something that you feel really passionate about when it comes to these things? Because I think we all have
I'm going to flip to the egg donation process for that question. I feel really strongly, and this is, of course, is a parental issue. It's not a legal issue, right? So it's a parental choice here. But when you're talking about dealing with anonymous donors or known donors, I have a strong belief, and I don't impose this belief, but if I'm asked the question, I say that I have a strong belief that more information is better than less information for a child in the future. So I think that it's important that, if possible, people have known donations. So that doesn't mean that they have to be best friends, that they need to have, Sunday dinner together. But as a child that's created through somebody's donated material, this is part of the fabric of their life. And so when they are older and they've got questions, you as an intended parent can point to that information. And you as a donor, if you have your own children, you can point to who these people are that you helped. So your own child, as a child from a donor, knows that potentially there is a person out there that they're genetically connected with. I feel passionate about that issue, that more information is better than less for all parties.
That's something we feel very strongly about. I did my first donation 4 days after my 19th birthday. And that was a long time ago now. That was, 10 years ago. And so I look back and I'm so glad that I felt so strongly about it then, that, on some level, I always had the ability to know, and that, the 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old version of myself doesn't wonder why, or, what happened, or did something happen. Yeah. And I think that's really, it can be a bigger decision in the moment, I think, for some people to choose to be known, because it changes your life quicker, or, it has a bigger impact in that moment as opposed to just doing this thing anonymously. But I really do think about, the people who have done this anonymously, as they age, the wondering, and, if someone, I guess I do have a question. If someone decided to do this anonymously, say, 15 years ago, and this really bothered them that they don't know, is there any way to go back and rectify that, at all? Or is it, in technically speaking, close?
Absolutely. Okay. Right? And we even have, so to answer your question specifically, there's no reason why a donor, usually in anonymous agreements, even if they're anonymous, the contract will say something along the lines of, if a child, upon reaching a certain age, an age that the intended parents think is appropriate, or the age of 18, if that child wanted to reach out to the donor, then the donor would consider that request. So even though it's anonymous at the time of the donation, there's a potential option for the child to reach out to that donor through the agency, through the clinic. If neither of those parties are, in business anymore, they can reach out to the lawyer even. So you can reach out even under an anonymous scenario for contact.
So
And I don't think there's any reason why the donor couldn't do the same thing.
Okay, that's what I was gonna say. Is there, if even if it wasn't the child, if the donor came back and said, this is really bothering me, I wish I could know, there would be
Even
a way
if there
to,
was a child born.
yeah, like you could retroactively, circle back to it and fairly easily.
And absolutely, and even if it's an anonymous donation, the contracts always contemplate that if a child is born through an anonymous donation, the donor is still advised. They're not provided identifying information, but they're provided information that a child was born in this city on this date, and this is the sex of the child. And if the donor wanted more information, and if they changed their mind and they were open to a known donation, I've had that happen, where I've had counsel for an anonymous donor reach out to me where I'm representing intended parents. They've done an anonymous agreement, they've done donations, a child has been born, and I receive a request from the donor's counsel saying, can you reach out to your intended parents and say, are they open to switching this to a known donation? And that's happened.
Right. I think that's so important. We support women if they want to do anonymous donations, of course, but I think the idea that, when you're 60 years old and you don't know, that would eat me alive.
Because this is a side we don't see a lot, when it comes to all of this in sperm donation, now in 2025, would you say most sperm donation is still anonymous? Is it mostly known? What do you see?
Well, I can tell you from a legal perspective, if it's an anonymous sperm donation, I don't see it.
Okay.
Yeah, because you can, as a Canadian, purchase sperm from the United States. You can't purchase it in Canada, but you can purchase it from the United States. So if people are doing anonymous sperm donation, I don't see it in my practice. Okay. If people are doing sperm donations outside of agencies privately, I do a lot of those agreements.
And just because I'm curious and nosy, what do those look like? Are they very similar to a donor agreement?
They're very similar to egg donations.
Okay.
They're the contracts. They're probably less. Let's face it. Somebody who's providing a sperm donation goes through a lot less of a medical procedure than somebody who's going through an egg donation. An egg donation is a more invasive, there's medication involved. For a sperm donation, that doesn't happen. So the contracts are less complicated from that perspective, but they address the same things. Mm-hmm. They address, contact, if any. They address, the fact that once the sperm is donated, it becomes the property of the intended parents. It addresses a lot of the same things. It just doesn't have the medical protocol and procedure that the egg donation has.
Okay, this is another question. If you say, you're in a female in a same-sex relationship, you have a family member on the other side, no connection that way, and you choose not to do a legal agreement, can you choose to do that?
Sure.
Okay. And does that
I think it's risky.
Right. Because,
then they could, they could then claim parentage later on?
Not necessarily. Okay. The legal piece of the puzzle, in Alberta, because every jurisdiction has their own legislation on this specific issue, but in Alberta, if you've got friends, so a same-sex female couple, and then a sperm donor who's a friend, or even a family member. So if it's a family member providing sperm to the non-family individual who's going to try and carry a child, if they are using a method other than sexual intercourse to provide their sperm, so if they're doing home insemination, or if they're working even with a clinic and providing a sperm sample through the clinic and they're doing IUI at the clinic, or they're doing IVF at the clinic, if they're providing that sperm in a method other than sexual intercourse, it's a donation.
Right.
So it's not So it would, like the legislation says that there's no presumption of parentage for the donor.
Interesting.
If somebody had sexual, and I have had this happen before, where, a single female and a single male decided that the single male was going to assist the single female in having a child, they considered it a sperm donation, but they had sex. So under the law, it wasn't a donation. And all of the rights and responsibilities of parentage flowed to both parties.
So then what happened?
Don't know.
Oh.
All I can, because they came to me after the fact, right?
Right.
They came to me after the fact. One of the parties came to me, said, we want to do a sperm donation agreement. I'm already pregnant. You can do that. But because they had sex, they can't do a sperm donation agreement.
Right.
Interesting.
So, I mean, theoretically, I gave them that legal advice. Theoretically, the only way to protect, if this is what they ultimately wanted, if they wanted to ensure that the female was the only parent of this child, then the male party would have to likely go through an adoption.
Interesting.
Right. That's wild. I know someone who used a sperm donor to have her children, and she is in a Facebook group with all of the other women, not all, like I think there's like 5 or 6 of them, that have used the same sperm donor, and all these women have the same sperm donor for their children. And there's like 12 kids, and they're all on Facebook, and they like share photos of each other.
That's kind of cool.
I think it's really neat, yeah.
That is so neat.
Yeah.
Do you find with sperm donors that you work with and represent, do they do it all? Like, is this something like a regular, like they do it more than once, or is it like once is enough for a lot of a lot of people you see?
In my experience, the sperm donors that I'm dealing with are doing it. They might do more donations for the benefit of the recipient.
Right.
But they're usually, I have not done multiple agreements for a sperm donor with multiple recipients.
Oh, interesting.
I do think it's like more rare, yeah. When she was
Or
telling
maybe
me,
more
I
of
was
a-
like, what?
or maybe more of a U.S. thing. With like, would it be with how things are a little more commercialized in the U.S.? Like maybe it's a little different. I don't know. We do in Canada think of this a little differently than in the U.S. So
I don't know where her donor is from. Actually, that's a good point. I don't know if he's American or not. Because maybe that's what it is. Because like when you do an egg donation, like you're doing it for one family, and then if you choose to do it again, you're doing it for another family. But if you donate your sperm, you could like have. Like the guy with the Netflix special, like 80 kids.
Could that even be a thing here in Canada? Because I guess it can't be, because you can't just purchase sperm. Like you couldn't just have, a sperm donor here in Canada that donated a few times but has 60 children out there.
It theoretically could happen if you need sperm and you're purchasing sperm from the U.S. because men that are providing sperm, donating sperm to. Like the organization in the U.S. is called Zytec. There's more than one, right? But
yeah.
you can provide your sperm, and then that sperm can be purchased by multiple families.
Right.
Could
but
you be
here? That couldn't happen.
Yeah, here that couldn't happen though.
No, you would have to do a physical donation, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Could you, in theory, and I know you might not know this because you're a Canadian lawyer, not an American lawyer, could you be a man and choose to do this one time, like a donor would in theory? Or once you've given that donation, it doesn't matter how many ways it goes and how many children results. Like you lose that control.
I don't know the specific answer to that. I can tell you that anecdotally, that if you are choosing, I believe that if in the U.S. you're choosing as a male to provide your sperm to this organization, and you provide a sample, and there's any number of sperm straws that they're called, right?
Yeah.
That those straws can be purchased by multiple families.
Yeah, like you couldn't just say you would do this once. Yeah, you give up that right essentially. Interesting.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's wild. This is so interesting. Like, and not often, but every once in a while we get someone come through the egg donor quiz or whatever, and they're like, I'm actually a man and I'd really like to donate my sperm. And we're like, we don't do that here.
Yeah.
But I am like really curious about it. But yeah, we don't really do any of that stuff. So
Do you think that's
There's a
something?
lot of sperm donation happening privately. I would say that I do 20 plus agreements a year,
Do you think that'll?
which is a lot less than the egg donation agreements, but it is happening.
Do you think that's something that could change here in Canada? That it would open up a bit more like the U.S. or not under the current laws?
Who knows?
I think
Anything is possible, yeah.
I think the laws around sperm donation, like from what you've said, make more sense to me. Like, I think that's like a more
Like clear, cut and dry.
clear cut and dry, and like more like humanitarian, like a kindness more so, like that you don't have 75 children somewhere, you know.
When you do sperm donor agreements, is there really, like with the donor side, there's, reimbursements and some stuff like that. Is there really any for a sperm donor, or is it more or less just the cost of the paperwork for him is covered?
It depends, right? It depends if they're living in the same jurisdiction. So usually, I find that it's usually simply just the cost of the legal process. But if you have a sperm donor that lives in a different province and they're traveling to Alberta, let's say, and they're going to do a home insemination attempt, theoretically, they're entitled, of course, to reimbursement of their travel costs and all of the above. But I can tell you that in the sperm donation agreements that I've done, the reimbursement section is very minimal. It says that they're entitled, it can't be paid, they're entitled to reimbursement of expenses, they should have their receipts, of course. But it's pretty broad. Like there's not a lot of detail put in that.
Right.
How much?
I find that they're usually friends and family members.
Right. So they're not looking for like any.
Yeah, not
big
usually looking for that reimbursement.
Right.
What were you gonna say?
I was gonna ask, like, on average, how much of a reimbursement would they get? Like, is it they're not getting anything really?
It never says in the agreement
Right. Okay.
a maximum amount. I've never done a sperm donation agreement where there's been, how in the egg donations we usually talk about a certain amount for general expenses, a certain amount for travel if that's necessary.
Right.
The sperm donation agreements, I have never done one where it's capped that.
Right.
Interesting.
I've never discussed that.
I mean, they are doing a bit less than the donor, the egg donor, so that makes sense. I hope they get their lunch reimbursed or something, though. That was maybe a bit off the cuff, but I'm just saying.
Oh my goodness.
So, Alex, what has been your absolute favorite case? Like, that you just, like, when people ask you what you do, that's what you get to share, like...
Or, like, the moment you think of.
Yeah, that has been, like, wow.
The highlight.
This is why I do this.
Every case is like that.
Yeah.
But, like, every case and every case is different in a sense that if you're dealing with a same-sex male couple, they were never able to have a family together without the assistance of assisted reproduction technologies, right? And so they're coming at this process, and I'm speaking that for myself as as a gay man, right? So you're coming at this process from a very different place than a heterosexual female-male couple who have likely gone through a lot of trauma and a lot of disappointment and a really difficult process until when they get to, by the time they get to surrogacy, they've gone through a lot of difficult times. So every scenario is different. I have a soft spot in my heart for the very first couple that I helped. They were in Paris, and I mean years and years and years ago. And so.
Do you still hear from them once in a while?
I was talking to them yesterday.
Oh, I love
that's
that.
cool.
That's so cool.
Right, and then I was in Paris with my family last spring, and we went out and had lunch together with their child, and they're expecting their second now.
Oh, that's
so cool.
And did you help, obviously, with that second agreement, too? That's very cool.
That is so neat.
A really positive part of this legal process or this legal field for me is that you really develop strong relationships. You can develop really strong relationships with the people involved.
One that can be such a lengthy process. Like
it's a lengthy process, and each legal process, at least the way that I practice, and the most people that I know, each legal process is a flat rate. And so you're only getting paid as a lawyer during this process when you're assisting on one of those 3 legal processes. But the relationship can span 2 years or more. And, you know, I consider myself as part of their team for that process, and to be able to, for them to reach out to me and ask questions. And most people that I know that work in this area feel the same way. So you develop these relationships with these people.
I think that's so cool. You're getting
It's probably the most positive part of the whole career.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
How does your husband feel about, like, your career and the way that you've shared, and that you are so, because you've, you know, been through the process yourself and all of those things, how does he feel about that?
He loves that I work in the area.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't talk to him about specifics because
Obviously.
of confidentiality, of course, but he knows that I love it. He knows that I'm happy when I'm doing it.
Right.
And he thinks it's cool.
And what about your child that you've had as
He
a
knows all about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think
Yeah.
she'll follow in your footsteps?
Absolutely not.
What will she do?
I keep telling her, "You're going to be a lawyer?" And she says, "Absolutely not." Don't ask me why. She's only 12 years old, but she thinks what I'm doing is cool and interesting. But for whatever reason,
12-year-olds
interest.
have real firm opinions about some things.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's so cool. That's 12 is a good age. They have opinions, but like they're real people at 12.
Yeah.
Like there's some opinions you gotta get out of there, but
Yeah, some of the opinions are not good, but they're fun.
How did you go, like, was it always a conversation you had with your daughter that, you know, surrogacy is how she came to me and that this is what you do to help make the world a better place? Or was it something you waited to talk to her about?
No. And if I'm asked by intended parents, I will share that. Again, that's a parental decision and a personal decision about how you address this with your child that's been born through this process. My opinion, and the way that Rodrigo and I dealt with it, was from the moment she was born, we talked to her about it even when she didn't understand what it meant.
Right.
So she knew that she had a surrogate, and she knew that she had an egg donor. And like, we read books to her about it growing up, and we showed her what information we had about the donors involved. So it was just, it became part of her own psyche.
Right. Never something she had to.
Before she even knew what it meant, she knew that this was a part of her story. And, you know, an interesting way, like, because she has 2 dads, and so an interesting thing that happened growing up was, I think she was in daycare, and she was being made fun of by a child because she had 2 dads. She didn't have a mother, and she came home and she said, "I was made fun of today because I don't have a mom." And I said, "You do have a mother. You have a surrogate mother." And that was the end of it.
Right.
Has she ever spoken to the surrogate mother? Does she?
Yeah.
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 The
And
surrogate's here in Calgary.
And is it very, like, is it someone she sees often? Like, is it?
I doesn't see her often, but we're in contact with her all the time.
Yeah,
That's
and
cool.
that's a normal part of her life and who she is.
Yeah, it's just a piece of that story.
I think it's so important for the children that are brought to the world this way to have that, because there is no panic moment or my life is a sham or I just don't know. Like, I think it's really commendable from just day one to own the truth and to know exactly.
Yeah. I think that the people, I understand why, kind of, but the people who wait till their child is 16 or 18 to be like, actually, this is how you came to be, I think that would just change your whole overview of your childhood. Like, I was lied to my whole life.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I can never judge or impose my thought process on another parent.
no.
And I've got people in my life, I've got people outside of the legal world that have gone through this process themselves, and they've made different decisions, and they've told their child when that child was older, and it became an issue,
Yeah.
right? It became an issue for the child to digest and to readjust their concept of who they were in the world, right? And so it's my opinion that you be upfront with it about it from the get-go. But there's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah.
That is a decision that you have to make on your own, with your own partner and with your child.
Because of your story and, you know, that you needed surrogacy to have your own family, is it something you find that clients ask you a lot about often? Is that
Absolutely.
a common?
Yeah. If I tell them, and I do tell them, that I've got personal experience as an intended parent, and if they want to ask questions, they can ask. And 9 chances out of 10, it turns into another half an hour conversation.
Right.
I think that's so important. Like, thank you for having those conversations, because they're so important to have, especially for someone who's walked through it on the other side, and someone who's, you know, brand new, deer in the headlights, just starting this journey.
Yeah.
Right.
To
hear.
And I especially find that with heterosexual couples.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
They're really interested most times on how we dealt with the fact that our child was born through assisted reproduction, and how that affected our child, and did it affect our child, and what you did, and how did it affect you as a parent?
Mm-hmm.
How did you feel when that baby was born? Do you feel any less as a parent to that child because you have no genetic connection? Okay?
What's your answer to that question? Like, what do you tell people?
Absolutely not.
Like, it's just as simple as that.
Yeah, when that baby's born, that's going to be your baby.
Yeah.
And you're not going to feel... Now, let's face it, my child's not genetically connected to me, so I don't know what it feels like to have a child that was born to me with my genetic material. I don't know if I would feel differently.
Yeah.
I can tell you that I never felt that my daughter was anything less than my daughter.
Yeah.
And I never even thought about it.
Yeah, once she's here and she's
yours.
with you, she's yours.
Yeah.
Did she ever really, other than, you know, that one child at daycare, did it really ever bother her come up as she's grown up so far?
No, not yet. It's never been, there's questions,
Of course.
but there's a curiosity. It's a curiosity type of question. It's not a question like, are you really my parent? Nothing like that.
Yeah. That's so
And I think that goes back to the fact that we decided to tell her before she even understood what it meant.
she just
Right?
knows
So
no different.
there's nothing odd about this to her.
Yeah, there's no, this is her life, she knows no different.
Yeah.
That's
You
so
are her
cool.
parents, and that's that.
I love that.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions for us on the other side of the chair? We've really grilled you.
I have no questions. I'm always open to hearing from you guys about things you think would improve the process, but no, I don't have any questions.
That's good.
Thank you so much for chatting with us and taking the time and sharing your information and your story and just
All of
All of
the
it.
things. Very
Yeah.
cool.
it was
This
great.
is
Anytime, always happy to have this conversation.
Well,
Anytime.
thank you. They're important to have, and we love that you joined us.
Yeah.
We actually did a stat one time. I don't know if we've ever talked about this, but when we kind of added up everyone who helps make a family, and it was about 80 different hands between us at this agency, you guys at the law office, the clinics, you know, the surrogate, her family, all those people, and I just think that's the coolest thing. And so, thanks for being a part of the team on these families.
Anytime, love it.
Okay, well we'll end the episode now, and we'll see you guys all very soon.
Yeah. Bye. Thank you for
Bye.
listening.
Thanks for listening,
Bye,
guys.
guys.